what you can see is that globally, we have lost over 50% of insects. Here in the US, some 70% of insects are gone by weight. Now, so you look at pollinators, some 70-80% of our food requires pollinators to assist. And when you take pollinators out, our food supply is going to collapse. So you have all these little issues there, each one of which should force you to change course, should tell you it's time to change course, and we're not. We're doubling down on it instead.
Yeah. So pulling on a couple of those threads. So Klaus talked about the timeless wisdom and principle of treating the soil as if it's a living thing, because it is. So there's these really interesting, let's call them fractal and cycle relative principles that apply to living beings. So for instance, in the Jewish tradition that Klaus was referencing, there's the idea that of working 7 days and then working 6 days and then having complete rest on the seventh day. And so corresponding to that basic pattern, the basic millennia old understanding of how you properly steward the earth is to work the earth for 7 years, and then for an entire year, let the land just completely rest and recuperate. And so each living thing has a time appropriate fractal cycle for work and rest. That is how God made basic living organisms to function, where you can draw on that creative capacity and you can cultivate and you can produce. But then both humanity and the earth needs a rest because it's living, and it has to last for millennia. So there's these, it's amazing when you look back at those traditions and how we're coming to understand them. Okay, so we have the idea of living earth and soil that has to last for millennia, and ideally, what we're doing is we're going beyond. We have a minimum criteria of sustainability, and then, like Klaus mentioned, above that, we can understand how we can actually be regenerative as a species, how we can actually consciously exist in a way that not only doesn't harm and not only sustains, but actually causes the earth to flourish over time. And so we have now, I think, a short window of time and the knowledge and the technology and the global reach and ability to locally be able to apply that knowledge to actually heal and regenerate our soil and our earth. And it takes a long time, but when you're dealing with those long time cycles, now's the time to start. So let's go to the issue of, want to highlight one more thing. So you can imagine, let's picture, I just got back a couple of months ago from the rainforest down in Amazon. And so when you're walking through the forest, you can see the life that's built itself up largely uninterrupted for millennia. You have, 1,000-year-old trees that are giant, and, roots that are 30 feet tall to trees that are hundreds of feet tall that are then nurturing the whole thing. And the amount and density of life and insects, every inch of soil for as deep as you can probably think is just teeming with life. And so the key thing to understand that Klaus was saying is life builds itself up from the bottom, not from the top down. And so we have the basic idea, let's say, of mass energy equivalent. And so you have something fundamental like energy, and all matter, all what we perceive as matter is really associated energy. And then you have information in the universe that it instructs that energy how to associate and disassociate into form. So you end up with life building itself up according to the instruction manual given by God and reflected in the DNA of all these different creatures. And so then you end up with energy associated into the basic elements that allow the microbiome to come into being, the simplest of being, the viruses and the bacteria and all those different things. You have the different kingdoms, And then on those, life rises up into more and more complex forms. And so everything kind of eats the thing below it. And as much of that next life form can exist as there is diversity and abundance in the substrates beneath it. And so you get this gradual layering up of life. So what Klaus was saying about the collapse of something like insect populations is so crucial. So Klaus, remind me of the stats that you said on collapse of insect populations in the U.S.
It's as high as 70%.
Something like 70%. I saw recently a study that they did of insect populations in Germany near national parks where you'd expect them to be relatively robust. And it was showing something like the same, something like 70% collapse in the amount of insects by mass and weight, let's say, right? Okay. So something that we're doing as a human species is causing the collapse of 2/3 of insects. And so it's like maybe smart to think, okay, why is that happening? When you look at the other studies on wildlife and biodiversity, it appears that 2/3 number is pretty pervasive. Like the studies seem to show that in many areas, approximately 2/3 collapse is about average for what animal populations are experiencing as well. And so those numbers match from top to bottom because life is building itself up consistently. So you can imagine that if we severely damage and destroy something like 2/3 of the microbiome, that's what's supporting ultimately the plants and insects and life that are trying to cooperate and thrive there. And then that's in turn making its way up into the birds and animals. And so you have this rising collapse of roughly 2/3 of life, which is like an apocalyptic scale. So we should be thinking really hard about whether that's going to keep raising its way up. And if we're doing something that's that destructive, that it's destroying 2/3 of life, what makes us think that that's not rising up?